1st, 2020, you're supposed to provide information, the buyer is the seller is to the buyer, as to home hardening provisions. If you have some home hardening provisions that you've already installed in the home or were installed in the home in 2020 or 2019 or whenever that it was built, actually 2018, 2017, whatever, shingle roofs would be one that have been around since the 90s. You can't have wood shingles. That was probably the first home hardening effort that the state put into play. And there's been many after that. But you're also supposed to disclose, again, it's an information outreach mostly, what home hardening improvements are in place. And if you know of home hardening improvements that could be added that would be cost effective, that might improve the the defensibility and survivability of your home, that some type of indication of what those are is also expected. And so that's the essential nature of the beast, is that we want to make sure that buyers and sellers are intimately aware of both the defensible space needs of their property as far as fuel reduction management at various, 0, 1, 2. The farther out you go, the less, the less fuels reduction is required as you get further away from combustible dwellings, but it still has to be thinned out in many areas. And then the second thing is that if they are compliant, great, prove it, like get your statement of compliance and show it to them. If you aren't compliant, then you have to figure out an agreement to become compliant in a certain period of time. Local jurisdictions, local responsibility areas have within their ordinances, and they vary from district to district. And we're hoping that we're going to be able to use something akin to Truckee fires as the boilerplate or template for a region-wide approach, so that we don't have to kind of navigate our way through the minutia differentiation between one jurisdiction and the next. Whether Squaw is different than North Tahoe, which may be different than Truckee, which may be different than Meeks Bay. We don't want that. And so the closer we can get to uniformity, the better off we are. And if you're outside the Lake Tahoe Basin, unless you're out in the hinterland, you're probably in a local responsibility area. There are some state responsibility areas in our jurisdiction. If you're inside the basin, it's a mix. And so that's one of the things you'll have to know. And I wanted to just be brief because I was told I had, 10 to 15 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. We haven't had any questions come in yet to the Q&A. If anybody out there has a question, feel free to put it into the Q&A, which you can access at the top of your screen. Your control panel will look like this. You can raise your hand by clicking the raise button once, or put some questions into the Q&A feature by clicking on there.
Oh, Maria, I'm sorry. Could I say one more thing?
Please.
I forgot to mention that, the part of it's not just part of AB 38, all the bills that have happened since then as well have, CAL FIRE does remapping exercises recurrently, but normally they're pretty consistent because things are pretty consistent across the state as far as, topography and such. But things have changed recently, climatizing wise and all that stuff. And so anyway, the latest, the fourth and final iteration of CAL FIRE's maps are out in total, phase 1 through 4. And we're all of TSBOR's jurisdiction is in phase 1. So we were actually done in, we were released in what? February of this year, I think, our portion of the map, but it includes El Dorado County, Placer County, and Nevada County. And importantly, the original legislation, way back when, I think it was PRC 4202, maybe, et al., spoke to just one fire hazard severity as being needed to be called out. The most recent iteration of the law speaks to the various degrees of fire hazard severity, from moderate to high to very high and so forth. And so it's more fine grained. And if you go onto the CAL FIRE website, you can actually type in the physical street address of the property you're interested in, and it'll tell you the zone in real time. I just wanted to mention that.
Thanks, John. We're actually in a moment going to hear from James Blattler, the Town of Truckee's Emergency Services Manager, about fire hazard severity zones. And John basically teed up us for everything else that we'll be talking about today. I'm going to touch on our ordinance update. I think Jana is going to talk a lot about AB 38 and how that is actually applied to and which types of properties it's applied to. One thing that John touched on that I just want to point out and sort of stress is that AB 38 is a sort of disclosure and compliance rule, right? It's telling you that you have to disclose whether you have complied with an existing law, which is PRC 4291. So for all of the talk today is mostly going to be about how to comply with AB 38. What the underlying factor there is compliance with defensible space rules, which are from PRC 4291. And there's a lot of talk, a lot of questions about how well each community is preparing itself for fire risk. And this is part of how we prepare. So, you guys are serving a very important role because you are sort of the first contact that a lot of the new buyers coming to the area have with our district, with the fire hazard severity here, and with, understanding their responsibility for addressing that and for being responsible about it. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to James Blattler, Town of Truckee Emergency Services Manager, to talk some more about fire hazard severity zones and those updates.
Thank you so much, Maria, and thank you, John. That was a perfect segue into what I'm going to present. I'm just going to quickly get over to sharing my screen, which I've learned is a lot easier these days than the early days of Microsoft Teams.
We can see it now.
Great. Well, now I can't see it though. So there we go. It's just popping up on my end. I jinxed it briefly. Oh, and I apologize. I pulled up the wrong one, but this is perfect because this week on Tuesday, we shared an ordinance introduction for the fire hazard severity zone update. And this is what it's going to talk about. So okay, it's pulling up the wrong presentation. Hold on. Let me do this. We even test ran this, so don't blame Maria for these problems because it worked well. Can everybody see my screen all right? Is it the normal presentation mode?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, here's the right one. For some reason, I was clicking the name and it's coming up with my other presentation. But so, as has been mentioned, here to talk about the update to the fire hazard severity zones. And I don't normally do this as an emergency services manager to have a disclaimer, but I felt like it was appropriate for this because I am not a real estate attorney, agent, or broker. And so this is just for informational purposes and not legal advice. And so please consult the appropriate party or person for specific legal real estate requirements. Sounds like you're going to get a whole bunch of that here today. But yeah, take mine as informational. So a little bit of background about fire hazard severity zones. They're not new in California. They've been around since the 1980s. First, what was regulated was the state responsibility area. So the state lands everywhere that's managed by the state of California. Unfortunately, because there have been a significant number of catastrophic, deadly, destructive wildfires, additional regulations have become necessary. And so those regulations have led to the identification of local responsibility area fire hazard severity zones. And so local responsibility areas, as has been mentioned, it's really towns, municipalities, special districts, counties, areas that the state or federal government are not responsible for managing. And so this is the first update, 2025, really since 2007 when the maps first came out. So it's been a considerable amount of time. And it took a long time for the first local responsibility maps to come out also. So it derived out of, if anybody remembers, the Oakland Hills fire, more precisely known as the Tunnel Fire, which really led to that regulation of local responsibility areas. And so it took them a fair amount of time to develop those recommendations for the zones. And it's been long enough to where they've made substantial updates. And so this is the first major update since then. The state took the first swing at this. And so I would say it was close to a 2-year process for them to update their zones. And they were formally adopted and went into effect in April of 2024. So the updates, because it's been a lot of time, they've been able to improve the modeling. And a lot of that is based on climate data, localized climate data. For instance, prevailing winds in our area might be a lot different in the, Truckee area, Tahoe Basin, than areas maybe a few hundred miles south or north of us. And so they've been able to take that information along with new fire history. As we unfortunately know, there's been a lot of significant fire history over the past couple of decades. And so basically what's required is that the state fire marshal needs to make zone recommendations. As was mentioned by John earlier, previously it was just the very high fire severity zones that were required to be adopted. And so the town did that in 2008. And then now with these new zones, they've also mapped moderate and high fire severity zones. And so they shared these updates, these recommendations to the town. It was on February 10th. As John mentioned, we were in phase 1 of the 4-phase rollout of these maps. And so the town has some requirements. So first and foremost, we needed to make sure that the information was publicly available for review and comment within 30 days of receiving those recommendations. And so we presented an introduction to our council, also to the public formally on February 24th. Also, we established a website, townoftruckee.gov/FHSZ update. And if you just go to townoftruckee.gov, you can find it pretty easily with a button there. So made sure the maps were available and used the since February time to do a lot of outreach on this update. And so another part of the requirement is that the town must adopt the recommendations by ordinance within 120 days of receiving the recommendations. And so that puts it at a June 10th deadline. And as I mentioned earlier, the introduction of that ordinance was just released by our town council this past Tuesday. And so in the first council meeting in May, it'll go back for formal adoption to meet that June 10th deadline. And one thing about updating those zones or adopting those zones that is important for people to understand is that the town has no legal ability to reduce the severity of any of these zone recommendations. So the state fire marshal has put in a lot of effort to identify these zones and make the recommendations. And so the town can increase severity of certain zones. We do have that authority. It gets a little bit more difficult if we want to call any zone a very high fire severity zone. You have to provide some substantial evidence to justify it. But the town can elevate any area as a moderate or high zone at its discretion. We didn't make any changes to the map. We didn't feel like we had sufficient evidence to do it. The approach is, a sound universal approach statewide, and we didn't have any justification, and we didn't receive really any public comment to increase the severity of zones. And so after these zones are adopted, they have to be transmitted over to the State Board of Forestry within 30 days of adoption. So what do these changes look like? So that what you see on your screen there, on the top end is the 2008 adopted zones. Those dark red areas are what were mapped as very high fire severity zones. That map up on top is still current, effective as of today here in the town of Truckee. Those pink areas, that's federal lands. So this regulation doesn't cover federal territory. So that's why those areas are not mapped. And then if you look at the bottom map, these are the zone recommendations, which are looking to be adopted, likely to be adopted by council via ordinance. As you can see, those green areas there, even though they're within the town of Truckee, those are not mapped because they're not regulated by the state. So there was about a 40% increase in very high fire severity zone. I believe it was 3,600 acres or so mapped at high, which is the orange area. And then there's a couple small slivers of moderate. But outside of the federal land, the entire town of Truckee has been identified as a fire hazard severity zone. Something that's kind of interesting that I like to point out, which when I first saw it, I was like, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If you look down at the screen at Donner Lake on the updated map, you'll see that much of Donner Lake is in a very high fire severity zone. The reason why they do that is when they make these hazard maps, they take a 50-year time horizon without considering any mitigation work. So think of these maps similar to like a flood map or a earthquake map or for fault lines. That hazard's there, and it doesn't take into account risk. And risk is what things look like after you've taken action to address that hazard. So if you don't take any action, mitigation action, you've got high risk if you're in a high hazard area. But similar to flood, if you live on the Truckee River, at the Truckee River's normal level, you're at high risk of being flooded if the water's ever increased. But if you built your house and property on stilts above the elevation of, that 100-year flood mark, then you're at very little risk of that hazard. And so they don't factor in risk at all when they make these recommendations. And it's an important distinction, especially when it comes to insurance, because insurance does take a risk approach. So the state insurance commissioner has formally come out and said that they don't expect these maps to impact insurance coverage. It's hard to imagine that an underwriter won't at least evaluate this information, but they do take a risk approach as opposed to a hazard approach. Similar to, if you bring up those other examples of hazards, in California, there's an earthquake risk or earthquake hazard. And it's very hard to get, very expensive to get earthquake insurance. But if you built your house on those base isolators that essentially the ground's shaking around you, but your house is staying put, there's very little risk of earthquake damaging your property. And so probably be a lot more affordable to get earthquake coverage, which you probably wouldn't need anyway if you had base isolators, but just an example. So what does that update process look like? As I mentioned, the first ordinance reading was done this week. The formal adoption is looking like it'll be the first meeting in May here in the town of Truckee. And then once those are adopted, we'll need to get those over to the state fire marshal. So what do they mean? Really, they come with zone-based regulations to help try to improve the wildfire situation for the entire state of California. So each zone that's declared and mapped comes with some requirements. Moderate just needs to be adopted, and this is all for the local responsibility area requirements. I'll get to the state in just a bit. And so high, when you move on to high, you're adding on building code regulations. And so the town of Truckee has declared the entire town a wildland urban interface area and requires those building code requirements town-wide, regardless of what zone it's in. And that's also what you're all interested in when the hazard disclosure requirement comes in, which is also required in the very high fire severity zones as well. And so this will be putting a bunch of new areas in the town of Truckee is having this requirement. So just real quick, this is a quick snapshot that's provided by CAL FIRE on just mapping out what those regulations are, both in the SRA, state responsibility area, LRA, local responsibility area. So you can see universally the hazard disclosure, that requirement begins in the high fire severity zones, and then is also remains in the very high. But the requirement is not there in the hazard disclosure. I will say when I looked at it, I counted about 20 parcels within the town of Truckee that basically would fall outside of this requirement. So that those couple small slivers of moderate, really there's only one on land and it's in a portion of Glenshire, the Glenshire community. And so I counted about 20 parcels where you don't have any parts that are high or very high. Wanted to point out just on the larger scope, so I showed you that map of Truckee, but this map is what's available at the link below the Office of State Fire Marshal, that website. That's the website that John was talking about, where you can go in and you plug in your address, and it actually will tell you exactly what zone you're in, who regulates the zone that you're in, and it also gives the parcels too. And actually, since I'm sharing my screen, I have it, and I can quickly just show you all how easy that process is. And so this is that website. Maria, can you see the screen on the website? Okay, great. All right, so this is that website that was mentioned on the slides. They have a bunch of information about what the background and what fire hazard severity zones are. And then they get to this really handy tool. And so right here, you can plug in your address. I'm just going to use Town Hall as an example. And if I can spell correctly. And so it's going to zoom in to the parcel you're looking into. And if you can see here, they do have the parcel lines in here as well. That's from public data. And it gives you basically showing that you're in a local. It'll say if you're a state responsibility area, a local responsibility area. It'll include what the, right now, because they haven't formally been adopted, it's showing that it's located in a high or recommended high fire severity zone. Once these recommendations become adopted, it'll show high fire severity zone. It'll show the jurisdiction there, what county, and then what county it's in. And then it'll also have an agency contact as well that you can reach out to. And so it might be helpful if I can find an address to use. Maybe we can click on something. I don't know if you can, yeah, you can click into it. Okay, so I'm just clicking right here on this map. And so this is in Placer County, unincorporated Placer County. And so that shows that it's in a state responsibility area, an SRA. It shows that the property is in very high fire severity zone, and the website and email for more information. So a pretty useful tool to look up exactly if you're dealing with a property and you're curious on what zone it falls in. So moving, let me pull up the display again, because I know I'm not working in podcast mode. All right, so, and I know this will be going in greater detail and it's been kind of covered, but I can share this presentation out, which has some links to some of the, AB 38 and some of the actual codes that you can dig into. But essentially, the hazard disclosure applies to sellers of real property within high or very high fire severity zone. That includes both SRA and LRA. The year the home was constructed matters. For some construction, as mentioned, is 2010, or for some of the requirements. I did see there is a new requirement starting on July 1st, 2025 about retrofits that have been completed while the seller has owned the property. And then you have to list features that might make the home more vulnerable to wildfire and flying embers.
But again, it's an information outreach. It's an information outreach piece. It's not a point of sale retrofit requirement to engage in activity. It's a informational outreach piece. Just to clarify.
Thank you, John. There's the benefits on information purposes only. So thank you for clarifying, John. And then there's the whole vegetation management ordinance deal as well. So the website I mentioned, if you're interested in what the update process looks like for the town of Truckee, fire hazard severity zone update. Local jurisdictions are having to go through this process statewide. As John mentioned, our entire region was in the first phase. So everybody in the phase 1 has that June 10th deadline to have these zones adopted. So I know we're kind of in a bit of limbo right now because we have the recommendations, but currently we're still functioning off the 2008 maps until they're adopted. But that concludes my presentation. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, James. And we're going to hear a lot more about the form from Jana, and John is here to pipe in as needed. We haven't had any questions come up. If people are wanting to access the links that James shared, we've put those into that Q&A feature. Just give a second to see if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I'm going to take back the screen here. All right, and I'll go ahead and pass it to CAR attorney Jana Gardner to talk about that form.
All right. Hi, everyone. So happy to be here with you all today. And I have to say, I hope everyone knows how lucky you all are to have such great information available to you. I go all over the state talking about AB 38 and these requirements. And not every region has such great resources available. So I think it's great that we're all here and that we're getting so much information. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can look at the FHDS form together. So give me 1 second to pull that up. Okay, so now we can see the fire hardening defensible space form. Okay, excellent. So just to reiterate some of the things that both John and James were already talking about, this FHDS form came into effect back in 2021 in response to the passage of AB 38, which had happened a couple years earlier, but it took a few years for the enforcement to go into effect. And it, like many laws that we deal with, is really complicated because it is a state law, right? But it is putting rules in effect that apply differently depending on where you are in the state. So the challenge we face at CAR, at California Association of Realtors, when we're creating these forms for real estate professionals to use in their transactions, is we're creating a form to comply with a state law that may be implemented differently depending on where you are in the state. And we don't have 30 versions, we have one version. So I get understandable pushback from people sometimes. Why is this form so complicated? Why are there 18 options of how it can be filled out? It's like, well, because how someone fills it out in the town of Truckee versus in the city of San Francisco or in Eureka or San Diego is going to be different. And so that's just the situation that we have. But, you know, we are now 4 years in more or less to this. And I think people are finally kind of getting it. Probably everything I'm saying to you is going to be a lot of refresher, but I am going to point out to you where you're going to be seeing some changes in the near future based on that new section of the law going into effect on July 1st. So it's going to stay looking basically the same. We're looking at the current version of the form right now. Section 1 there, law applicability, basically just summarizes the information you've already received, but it's a way to explain to your buyer and seller clients, this is what this law is, and this is how it applies. And generally, we're looking at residential 1 to 4 unit properties that are being sold that are located in one of those high or very high fire hazard severity zones. And like we just discussed, that is an ever expanding area. And so we just talked about all those changing maps. One thing that I point out to people is just because someone bought the house 6 months ago and it was in a certain zone does not mean that it's in the same zone today. I get that question a lot. Do I really have to order new natural hazard zone reports? You know, the house hasn't moved. Well, the house hasn't moved, but these maps and these zones do move. So yes, you need to check now more than ever, but really every time to make sure you understand what zone the property's in. The NHD statement is the best way to do that, or that excellent website that James just shared where you can plug in the address. That is a really good resource because it shows you not just are you in a zone, but what type and who is the agency that controls. Because as we look at the next page of this form, I talk to people who say, well, okay, we know what zone it is, but I don't even know who to contact for more information. And that website tells you exactly who is your authority, who do you want to talk to. But this law applicability section summarizes residential 1 to 4 unit property in a high or very high fire hazard zone. And then there's a slight difference between who has to fill out the home hardening portion of the disclosure and the defensible space portion. And the fire hardening portion has that cutoff of properties built before January 1st, 2010. Why? Because, well, then properties built more recently, we assume they are built to more modern building codes. They have fire hardening features built in. The presumption is the older properties do not. For defensible space, it does not matter what year the property was built, because now we're not talking about the structure. We're talking about the area around the structure. So it doesn't matter if it was built 6 months ago. You want to still be making sure defensible space is complied with. So moving on to look at section 2, this is what it looks like as of today. This is the fire hardening disclosure portion. That section in all capital letters is a legally mandated notice that buyers need to receive explaining to them what fire hardening is and why it's important and where they can get more information. And then right now what we have is a series of disclosure questions. Like we said, informational, seller, are you aware of any of these home hardening vulnerabilities? And it is based on a seller's awareness standard, like most residential real estate disclosures. And some of these sellers are going to be very aware of and some less so. I sure think the seller's going to know whether they still have a wood shake or shingle roof on their property. They probably know if they have single pane versus double pane windows. Do they know if they have vents with openings in excess of 1/8 of an inch? Maybe, maybe not. So this is a seller, are you aware kind of question. And as of now, seller answers these questions. Yes, I'm aware. No, I'm not. And they move on. But we are about to have an update to this law and a corresponding update to the form. I don't have a version of it to show you yet, but I can tell you what you should expect to see. The new law, or not the new law, excuse me, the new phase of this law goes into effect July 1st. So this was part of originally AB 38, but when this law was going into effect in 2021, we're like, oh, 2025, there's a whole new thing we'll have to add to the form. That's years from now. Well, it's here. And so in our June forms release, there's going to be a new subsection added to paragraph 2 that will list out, like John discussed, what they call those low-cost retrofits that can be done to the property, basically telling the buyer, here's a list of a dozen or so retrofits that can be done to make the property safer. And then the seller will check a box to indicate if the seller has done any of those retrofits during their ownership. And the two key things to remember, like John highlighted, is it's not a point of sale requirement. There's no obligation for the seller to go out and do those retrofits. They might choose to, but they have no obligation to actually do them at the point of sale. And it's based on if they were done during the seller's ownership. So the seller may or may not know if these retrofits were done prior to when they were the owner. But to the extent the seller has implemented any of these, they're going to give the buyer that information. And then they'll also be telling the buyer, but on the flip side, well, I haven't done these other ones. So buyer will have that information. If they choose to implement them themselves during their ownership, they can do that. And so keep that in mind. And I have someone asked for an example of some of those retrofits. I don't have the list directly in front of me, but that is absolutely something that we can pull up and share, because I do have that list, just not in front of me right at this second. All right, so that's the home fire hardening portion. Now let's talk about defensible space, where things get really fun. And that is because defensible space rules, at least sort of how they are monitored or are enforced, are so wildly different around the state. And you were talking about how even in your own area, depending on which district you're in, which fire agency you're working with, it can be really complicated to figure out what the rules are. And then imagine trying to figure them out for the entire state. It is really complicated. So what we've done is put together a version of this form that hopefully you can make work for your particular rules that you're following. Few key things to know. The one thing that a seller absolutely needs to relate to a buyer is there a local vegetation management ordinance in place? And the answer, generally speaking, is going to be yes, in my experience. If you're in one of these high or very high fire hazard severity zones, almost everywhere has some form of vegetation management ordinance. Like we were discussing, it can't be less than the state requires. It can be more. Sometimes it's very very similar with little to no difference. Sometimes it has a much greater safety level requirement than it would under the state law. And I also just want to reiterate something that Maria pointed out, because when I get a lot of pushback from agents and sellers saying, oh, my sellers don't know about this, and, you know, having to figure it out for the sale. I like the point that Maria made, which is AB 38 did not create defensible space laws. There was an existing requirement for properties located in these fire zones to always maintain defensible space. Now we just have this requirement that buyers be made aware of the status of the property and either have defensible space compliance obtained, or buyers agree that they are going to take care of it to the extent the law allows them to do so. So it's not that AB 38 all of a sudden said everyone start maintaining defensible space. The Public Resources Code already said that. This is just really bringing information so that buyers and sellers are being transparent about what these requirements are. So sellers are going to let the buyer know, is there a local vegetation management ordinance? Maybe not, but probably. Then the seller is going to tell the buyer, is the property currently compliant? Now, it's possible that as of the time the seller is filling out this form, they may not know. They may have not had an inspection yet. Depending on where the property is located, the ability to schedule one of those inspections can be different. Some places you can get one in a week or two. I've heard from some places that there's a very long backup. So the seller, despite best efforts, may not even have had an inspection done, but it's also possible that they have. Some areas have regular inspections that occur once a year or on some other basis. So if the seller has had an inspection, either because they ordered one or one just took place within the past 6 months, they're going to tell the buyer, here's my inspection. Great news, property's in compliance. Here's the letter. Well, then pretty much everyone's done and everyone's happy. Or they might say, well, I had an inspection, the property's not in compliance, the work hasn't been done, but here's the information. And it's really about getting that information into the buyer's hands. And then the final aspect is figuring out, okay, who is going to make sure the property comes into compliance? And this is where there has been some confusion, and this is where it depends on what the local law requires of you. So under the state law, if there is no local ordinance that says otherwise, so, you know, it's going to depend depending on which jurisdiction you're in. But if the property just follows the state law and the locality doesn't have a different rule, state law says that buyer can agree that they'll bring the property into compliance within 1 year after closing. They have 1 year to go ahead and bring the property into defensible space compliance, do the work needs to be done. That's the default on this FHDS form. We sort of have it default to say property under the state law, buyer will comply within 1 year. But there are a lot of other options that might apply. There are many ordinances, I think often ones that apply up in a lot of your areas, where there is a local ordinance that says, yeah, when you sell the property, someone has to bring it into compliance. If there's a rule that says it can be done, but it can be done after closing, you know, buyer can bring it into compliance after closing, maybe they have 30 days or 90 days, then they're going to be checking the box for number 2. They're saying there's a local ordinance tied to the sale of the property, but either party can obtain documentation and buyer will do it after closing. Or number 3, if there's a local ordinance that doesn't tie it to the sale, but maybe, you know, buyer is supposed to be bringing it into compliance within a certain window of time, that's when you're checking number 3 there. That's going to be very, very common in my experience for a lot of areas. And then the final options are for when the seller either already has or will have to bring the property into compliance, if there is a true point of sale requirement. So if in your district there is a rule that says when you close escrow, you need to have in your hand a certificate saying you have complied with defensible space, then that's checkbox number 4. And seller says, well, I'm going to do it because the law says I have to. Number 5 is a great situation. Seller says, I've already complied. Here you go. And number 6 is even if the seller is not required to do it by law, it's negotiable. Just like the buyer can ask for the seller to, you know, fix a broken garage door during escrow, they can ask the seller to bring the property into defensible space compliance, and that can be negotiated as well. And that's what number 6 says. And then there is a place when there is a report that exists for the seller to tell the buyer who's the local agency, where can you go get that report. And the final option here, this final inspection report disclosure, is for a specific situation where the seller has had work done on the property and they have us to basically do remodeling that involved those defensible, or excuse me, the home hardening features. If they got a final inspection report, law says they need to provide that to the buyer. Hopefully sellers would be doing that anyway. They should be providing all reports that they have in their possession to buyers. And this is just a specific requirement that they do so. So that's the FHDS form. Like I said, keep your eyes out. Our next form release is going to be in mid-June. And that's when you will see that added section talking about the work the seller may or may not have done on the property.
And if I could just briefly speak to the sub item 4, the check item 4,
yes,
disclosure. This was an item that a lot of our local entities, our local fire districts, North Star was one that we dealt with early on, that just tried to enact it without considering that we have winter. You know, everyone thinks California, we're surfers. No, we're skiers. And so we can't necessarily give you a certificate of compliance at the point of sale if we have 8 feet of snow on the ground and we can't get an inspection done. And so we had to sit down with the North Star Community Service District and their fire department underneath them and explain how we need that gap. It doesn't have to be a year. It could be, you know, throughout the next summer that they have to complete it, you know, but that there has to be some acknowledgement of the fact that we have seasonal impediments.
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that lines up true with the feedback that I've heard from realtors when finding out about this law and saying, what are we supposed to do when they're moving in January? So I'm glad to hear there's been some compromise on that front. All right. And that was what I wanted to share.
Thank you so much, Jana. We got a couple of questions in the chat, but most of them were ones that we were able to respond to, and I'll just highlight for people. It looks like you guys are more comfortable entering your questions in the chat, so that's where we're going to be concentrating. There was a request for the address lookup site that you referenced, which I believe you were referring to the fire hazard severity zone address lookup that James had mentioned. So that is included a couple of times in the chat. And there was also a request for some examples of the low-cost retrofits. We have also included a link to CAL FIRE's low-cost retrofit guide, which I would assume is the source of what is going on to that list. So there's exactly a link to that. Perfect. There's a link to that in the chat as well. And we will, you know, all of these links that get referenced in the chat, we'll put them together so that they're in one place for all of you guys that are listening. So don't worry about scrambling through the chat to capture everyone. There was also a question about whether there are any benefits, I assume from the home hardening retrofits, or will there be if a home is in a FireWise approved community? And that's something that we're going to hold that question until later in my presentation, because I'll circle back around to that. That's more of my jurisdiction. If anybody else has any questions at the moment, feel free to throw them in. And we had one question, one more question about applicability of the regulations. Since these regulations specifically reference residential improved properties, is it correct that commercially zoned land and vacant unimproved residential lots do not have to comply with fire hardening and defensible space regulations? Jana, can you speak to the applicability of AB 38 disclosures in reference to those property types?
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, so drawing that distinction, AB 38 disclosures, the fire hardening and defensible space form applies to residential 1 to 4 unit properties. It is in the law. It's part of Civil Code section 1102, which is the same section where we get the real estate transfer disclosure statement, the TDS. So it has generally the same applicability as that law. So for a purchase and sale transaction, having that FHDS form we just looked at, disclosing this information about fire hardening, having the agreement with a buyer about defensible space, that applies to residential 1 to 4 unit properties located in the fire zones.
But recognizing that at least with local jurisdictions, they have the option, and some believe, the obligation to include undeveloped lots and lands and commercial properties, because as we all know, one person's defensible space is only as good as your neighbor's. And if your neighbor is a bad actor, you're still going to burn if you do everything right. And so there are many jurisdictions locally that I know are looking at going beyond AB 38's base requirements.
Yes, exactly. Thank you for clarifying that. And just to stress what the distinction that we outlined at the beginning, that we're talking about the applicability of the disclosure rules and the applicability of those to commercial land or vacant lots, which does not address the underlying law that we're talking about compliance with, which is PRC 4291 and local ordinance, which the Truckee Fire Defensible Space Ordinance applies to all properties within the district. So the disclosure is not something that you need to worry about in the context of your real estate transactions, but as we discussed earlier on, PRC 4291 is required to be maintained at all times. So I would not be surprised if we came to be in a world where even if the disclosure wasn't required, a buyer started requesting to know whether or not the property was in compliance. Because if they buy a property that is not presently in compliance, they are responsible for bringing it into compliance because it should have been in the first place. So keep that in mind with all of these distinctions between the disclosure and the underlying defensible space law itself. Do we have any other questions come up? I don't see any in our chat.
I am seeing none in the chat and Q&A.
Okay, great. Well, I will jump into my presentation then. Once again, my name is Maria Marsh. I'm the Wildfire Prevention Specialist with Truckee Fire's Wildfire Prevention Division. Give me 1 second to organize my screen so I know what I'm doing. We have talked about rules and applicability in a lot of different jurisdictions right now. So what I just want to stress that what I'm going to be talking about applies within Truckee Fire's jurisdiction, which pretty sure you guys all know this, but we basically run the Interstate 80 corridor from about the Highway 20 interchange to Herschdale with a little pop out to Floreston. So the LRA, that local responsibility area of the town of Truckee, is entirely within our district, and the rest of the district is SRA, which is part of unincorporated Nevada County and part of unincorporated Placer County. So clear as mud. I'm sure you guys have no questions whatsoever about that part. But moving on, we're always happy to help and to answer questions and sort of give you guys some resources to figure out which district you're operating in and that sort of thing. Just a quick reminder that our division and all of our programming is funded by the 8-year special tax created by Measure T. We have a small team of 4 full-time staff, and we're bringing on 7 defensible space seasonal inspectors this year. You can always reach any of our team members at dspace@truckeefire.org and our phone number. So let's jump right into some sort of business updates. We had mention of Defensible Space Ordinance, local Defensible Space Ordinance. As most of you guys know, we do have an existing Real Estate Defensible Space Ordinance, 01/2019. We are in the process of updating our local defense ordinance. That's in the works over the next couple of months. It has been revised since previous drafts, so if you engaged before, I would recommend that everyone take a look and participate in the community meeting. I'm going to highlight how you can participate with us in that. This will replace existing Truckee fire ordinances, including that 01-2019. So we have been operating with you guys under the intersection of that local ordinance and the state law. So there will be some slight changes that I'm going to highlight for you guys. Specifically, 01-2019 was passed before the state law was passed and put into effect. So it applied disclosure requirements to more property types than the state law does, in particular to undeveloped lots and properties in that moderate fire hazard severity zone. The updated ordinance aligns us more closely with the state law for disclosure purposes. Again, stressing this is just for the real estate disclosure purposes. Of course, remember, that the disclosure purposes are separate from the actual requirements for defensible space, and properties that are exempt from the disclosure laws are not exempt from the defensible space requirements. So just like any other property, they all should actually already be kept in a compliant state, regardless of the event of the sale. So whether or not the disclosure is required, we encourage owners to complete the required work, and, demonstrating a compliant report could be a negotiation point in favor of your seller. The one other thing that would go into effect with this draft, and I think this is what a lot of you already do, which is that if the seller is disclosing and not bringing into compliance, they need to disclose any inspection. So if they have only had a curbside inspection and they haven't had, let's say it's the winter and they haven't had a full access inspection, or let's say the inspection report that they have on file is 2 years old, they still need to disclose that rather than just saying that there is no report that fits that within the past 6 months. So pretty much for any property sale that you are having, you should check with us if there's an existing report on file. Almost every single property owner within the district should have received an inspection, received access to the code. And if they can't provide you access, then reach out to us and we'll be able to. Some other important updates related to Zone 0 that will go into effect with the implementation of our ordinance. This is actually not very different from the best practices that we've been inspecting to anyway. So I don't think that you guys are going to be shocked by anything in here. We went into much greater detail about the Zone 0 changes and specifications last week on our training for defensible space service providers. So I hope to have some time to go into this with you guys, but if I don't, I'm going to share the resource with you in order to watch the specific sections on the Zone 0 updates. And then we will also have an opportunity for you to participate in a community information meeting where we'll cover in much more detail the changes of the ordinance. So I encourage you guys to engage with us in this process. The next business item is specifically about you guys and our real estate inspection program. This winter, I invited my most frequent inspection requesters to collaborate on how we could improve the process of real estate inspections for you guys. So I wanted to first of all thank Natasha, Rebecca, John, and Sean for participating in this with me. We had some great conversations to better understand each other's side of these interactions, and I think it was really informative for all of us. Per their feedback, we've made some pretty significant changes this season, this coming season, that we hope you guys are going to be happy to hear about, and I hope that when we all implement them together, they're going to be successful in achieving some of these changes that that your peers were really looking for. So the first thing is that we have launched a website which has a ton of information. We basically want to put into your guys' hands a lot of the talking points that you get asked about a lot on real estate inspections. We are also changing our inspection system to better align with how we actually conduct the inspections. We're hoping this is going to significantly decrease our in-office time and increase the amount of time that we can spend in the field. We are hiring a dedicated real estate inspector. This was a big ask from you guys, and it took some convincing. But one of our seasonals coming on board is going to be specifically focused on real estate inspections. This should significantly improve the turnaround time of the, from when you request an inspection to when it actually takes place. And lastly, just in terms of communicating with you guys, we are now collaborating with Sue at TSBOR to release, pertinent updates via the TSBOR newsletter. So that's something that you guys should always have an eye on for updates from us. The work in progress is that we're aiming for, last year, we were operating on a 3-week maximum turnaround time. Often we were able to get it done sooner than that, but in the busiest of the seasons, we just, it wasn't possible for us to get it done earlier. What we're hoping for is that the changes that we're making are going to bring us down to a 1 to 2 week turnaround time. And yeah, the proof will be in the pudding. We'll see what happens. We appreciate your guys' flexibility in sort of exploring these options with us. We're all learning as we go. We are also working with our HOAs for more of them to conduct their own general inspections, not their real estate inspections. Tahoe Donner is the only HOA at present that does their own real estate inspections, but HOAs doing their own general inspections with our software, in theory, means that the property owners will hopefully have more knowledge of their defensible space obligations and hopefully be closer to compliance when they actually come to you to start the sale process. One of the other things that the working group shared with me is that the inspection report can be pretty difficult for inspectors and for the sellers and for you guys to understand, and requested a real estate specific report. We are exploring that option with our software provider as sort of a long-term project. In the meantime, time permitting, I'm going to go into some sort of tips for you guys on navigating what I know can be a pretty cumbersome report. So all of that being said, things that we are doing to hopefully achieve some of our goals for our real estate inspection program. We would like to be working with you guys to decrease the number of urgent requests. We're hoping that the improved turnaround time negates the need for the majority of those urgent requests. That being said, just like last year, we are available and open to, when you guys have an urgent situation, communicate with us. We do still, of course, encourage you to schedule the inspection early and get the work taken care of. We're also hoping to decrease re-inspections, and I'll talk about a couple of different ways that we are hoping to achieve that. And lastly, we're hoping for more buyer engagement. This is something that requires more outreach, something that also requires engagement, hopefully from you guys. One of the things in our poll that some of you took the survey was that most of you support your buyer in some way for achieving their compliance. We would like to see that sort of fulfilled to the same extent that you support your sellers, which is helping them understand the report, helping them engage a contractor, and helping them get the inspection and bring the property to compliance. I think we're gonna skip that one for now. So inspection requests. This is the nitty gritty, talking about inspections and the inspection reports that you guys are most interested in. For the sake of time management, which is not one of my strengths, I'm not going to go into super detail, as many of you are really familiar with this process, but we also have a lot of new participants in the presentation this year, so don't hesitate to ask for more detail in the Q&A. The burning question I know from all of you is when we're going to start inspections. We will be opening to requests at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. We will start conducting the inspections on Tuesday, unless we get a bee in our bonnet and are able to start Tuesday after or Monday afternoon. We ask you to be gentle with us. We aren't expecting to have a huge backlog since we have more dedicated time from our inspectors this year, but please prioritize what you are putting into the request system. And if there's still a ton of snow on the ground at a particular property, hold off on putting that one in. I'm going to talk more about the actual real estate process. And then lastly, I'm going to let Tahoe Donner address when they will be opening their calendar, because they still have a lot more snow up there than we do. The link to request an inspection will be live at the top of the real estate page, truckeefire.org/real estate. So what is the process going to look like? This is unchanged. You will submit an inspection request. You'll receive an email confirming your request. The inspector will arrive unannounced, which is how most of your inspections worked last year. The inspection will take place within about 2 weeks of the request, and within 24 to 48 hours following the inspection, you'll receive an email that gives you access to the report via the code. So that all sounds the same. What is actually different? Sorry, I'm skipping through these slides faster than you can even look at them. But what are the changes going to be? So as I mentioned, we are switching to a new inspection system that we're hoping is going to allow us to spend more time in the field and less time managing the office calendar. The main difference with scheduling the inspection for you guys is that the form is shorter, there are a lot fewer questions. The challenge here is that we need you to put into the notes section, which is just free form, any specific information that you need to share with us. If there's a locked gate, if someone wants to meet the inspector, if there's a specific date or deadline by which time you need us there, if you want us to know what contractor you're working with, that is up to you to put into the notes section, because we won't have specific, drop down questions for each of those. You will be signing up for an unscheduled inspection. So in the past, we were, with your permission, conducting the inspections basically as soon as possible, unannounced, but now you will not be getting any specific scheduled appointment. It will be unscheduled. And it will be unannounced by default. In the past, you were checking a box to confirm that it was okay for us to arrive unannounced before the appointment time. Now this is going to be the default. The inspector will arrive unannounced within regular business hours, within 1 to 2 weeks. If you don't want the inspector to arrive unannounced, you need to specify that in the notes section. You need to give us some details to help us get started, and then we'll reach out to you to make something specific. If you want us to text someone when we're on our way, we can do that. If you want us to schedule a specific time with you, we'll reach out to you and get that on the calendar. But know that those specific requests are, they'll slow us down a little bit in punching through the inspections. I'm going to pause really quick and see if there are questions about everything that I just covered before I go into more of the sort of common questions we get for inspections.
We do have just a couple of questions in the chat regarding report access. Do you want to cover that now?
I will talk about report access in a couple of slides.
Perfect. We'll table those for later.
Okay, perfect. All right. So if you guys want me to speak to any of these sorts of questions that are on the screen right now, sort of FAQ about the actual requesting the inspections, put them in the chat and I'll speak to them. Otherwise, these are things that I think most of you are familiar with at this point in our process. And we're also going to have a pretty extensive FAQ on our actual scheduling page so that you can refer back to it to refresh your memory. The next really big topic and question, does my property need a real estate inspection? There are a couple of different answers built into this, or questions sort of that this breaks it down to. The first one is it subject to Civil Code 1102.19, also known as AB 38? The short answer to this question is that Truckee Fire can't answer this question for you. This is a question about real estate law that we are not experts in. I refer to James Blattler's disclaimer. If you have questions about the applicability of AB 38, you need to contact CAR. The new ordinance, as I outlined, it's aligning more closely with state law in terms of applicability. So there will no longer be a difference within Truckee Fire as to who is subject to the disclosure laws. Again, stressing. The change is about applicability of who's required to make the disclosure. It is now just going to be in alignment with what you guys are already familiar with on the state level. Let's see what's next. Seem to have gotten out of order. Give me a second. Yeah. The only time that we will weigh in on applicability is really more about whether we can do an inspection. Is there a building exterior and landscaping for us to inspect? This usually comes up in the context of townhomes and condos. So this is how we would answer that question. Is there something for us to actually inspect? If your parcel looks like this, so let me step back. Our inspections are based on a parcel level. So we inspect what is within the boundaries of that specific APN. If the parcel looks like this with, the structure in the center and then lots of space around it, then yes, we can conduct an inspection and we can provide that information for you to do with as you need, for you to decide if it is necessary to disclose or not. If it looks more like this, then no, we cannot inspect it. In this situation, the boundaries of the APN follow the walls, I would say the 4 walls, but it looks like there are about 10 here, the walls of the structure. So this is a different sort of situation where if we showed up to the property, there's what we inspect is the exterior of a building and the defensible space surrounding it. There is literally none of that in a parcel like this, so we would not be able to inspect a property like this. The last aspect.
Would you be looking at that as common area in the example where the property of the, let's say, fourplex is just within the walls, then the common area is the defensible space area of interest?
Great question. I believe that some fire jurisdictions require that the common area be in compliance or be disclosed in conjunction with the sale of an individual unit. We do not. We would look at the actual ownership of that space around, and whomever is the entity that owns that space that surrounds the building is responsible for that defensible space. But the person that's selling the unit within the walls, let's see if I have a little laser. The person that's selling the unit within the walls here, they don't have full control. They might, be a partial owner in the entity of the HOA. But we're not going to, require them to ensure that the HOA has brought the entire, commonly owned area into compliance before they sell their property. Does that answer your question, John? Okay, thumbs up. So the last question of does it need a real estate inspection is really asking, is there an existing report that fulfills the AB 38 requirements? So let me show you where to find that information. The AB 38 requirements, as I understand them, require that the inspection have been conducted within 6 months of the transaction date. This is a view of one of our inspection reports, and up here you will always see the date of the last evaluation. The other factor is that it should have been a full access inspection. This isn't how it's not explicitly stated in AB 38, but if you're disclosing the condition of the property, then you should be disclosing the condition of the entire property. Full access inspection, on that front page of the report, you can always see the inspection access. It will usually say full access or curbside. And on the highest level, what you need to know is that a full access inspection is what you need for the disclosure. Brittany, do we have any questions specifically about that stuff before I go on to the next?
No, it was more about sharing of the inspection reports. So how do HOAs obtain the software in order to perform their own in-house defensible space inspections is one question.
Any HOA that's interested in doing that should reach out to us. It requires, we're working with several HOAs and they know who they are, but it requires that they be trained to the same level that our seasonal inspectors are being trained. And then we would work with you to basically establish your inspection program.
And the second question, which I think would be good for you to speak to, is can inspection reports be shared between entities, i.e. HOA inspections can be available at the fire department and vice versa?
Good question. If an HOA is conducting inspections on our software as basically a designee for those general inspections, then the fire district has access to see those inspections. An HOA does not have access to see the inspections that have been conducted by the fire district. If an HOA becomes part of our inspection program and they are conducting the defensible space inspections, then yes, they would have access to those inspections. I hope that makes sense. I'm going to defer more questions about the HOA inspections until later, because that is mostly really an aside. At present, Tahoe Donner is the only HOA that's doing their own property sale inspections. I have not much time to get through a whole bunch more information. So what I'm going to do is let you guys know some of the highlights of what I was hoping to cover, and you can let me know which ones you want to come back around and talk about. Property lines. We often get questions about how close you need to go to the property line. If we mark corners, whether there are items on the report or not on the report that are or are not on your property. So that's something we can come back around to. Is home hardening required for compliance? And the presence of home hardening findings that speak to the disclosures that you are required to make on the FHDS form. Let me know if you want to hear about that. This one's easy. Is there a certificate? No, there is not. We understand that people generally use the first page of the report. Accessing the report. I have a lot of slides that I would love to share with you guys to sort of give you some tips and better ideas about navigating the report. Let me know if you're interested in hearing about those. They include details about how to create a login to more readily access all of your properties, some tips for navigating between the PDF and the online report, and some specific things that you should be looking out for when you are viewing the report. I also can talk about submitting photo resolutions, which is something that we are hoping to encourage and make more available to some of you, depending on the conditions of a property. We also have a bunch of information about our defensible space service providers. They had a training last week that I would love for all of you to also, skim through so that you have an idea of what direction is being given to them. The provider list will be updated early next week. We also have some tips for working with those defensible space providers. And we have a bunch of highlights about the importance of Zone 0 and what specifically we're looking for in Zone 0. And with that, I'm going to wrap up my time and pass it to Cole at Tahoe Donner. So reflect on the options I presented and let us know in the chat or Q&A if you guys would like me to speak on any of those specifics, and we'll circle back to it when we have a Q&A time at the end. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Cole, who is our defensible space supervisor at Tahoe Donner Forestry.
Cool. Thank you so much, Maria. Let me share my screen very quickly. All right. Can everybody see my screen? Can you guys see my screen shared?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Oh, okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Paul.
you. Right on. Well, thank you so much, Truckee Fire, for the presentation and for inviting us here today. My name is Paul Salmon Hidalgo. I'm the Defensible Space Supervisor, JS Analyst. And, I monitor the real estate inspection program very closely. Something to know about me, I'm from Spain, so I have an accent. That means that I'll try to be very clear, but if you have any questions because you can't understand me, please send me an email to psalmon@tahoedonner.com. Before starting and getting into details, I wanted to remind all of you, and because I would like to know that you tell your potential buyers that besides all the perks and the amenities that we have at Tahoe Donner, when you buy property here, you're joining a community that protects the environment and safeguards lives and property. And, another interesting fact that I wanted to let you know is that Tahoe Donner has acquired a first of its kind wildfire insurance policy that could help change the insurance industry and ultimately make it easier for homeowners to get insurance. That's a big subtitle on the Tahoe Donner's 2025 May magazine release next month, so stay tuned for that. And this is thanks to collaboration with the Neighboring Conservancy and a lot of GIS recovery data for all the projects that we've been completed, that the Forestry Department has done, as well as all the defensible space that has been done thanks to our members and with the start of the program that Bill Howdishell put together. So let's get into details with our program, and let's start with some important announcements. We're going to start the inspections on May 19th, and this is mainly due to snow conditions and trainings. So expect us to start inspecting on that date. We have a change in email. We are discontinuing the defensible space real estate at tahoedonner.com. And we're just going to use the defensible space at Tahoe Donner email. And that's because we're streamlining everything through the same portal and through the same team so that they can answer your questions faster. All inspection requests have to be made through our portal, and I'll get into more detail with that. And please wait for your inspection before hiring a contractor. And that's because we need to tag trees. And it's too bad when someone hires a contractor, completes the work, then we show up and tag a bunch of trees, and now the contractor has to come back. So ensure that you have the inspection beforehand and that your contractor understands all the parameters. And let me show you a little bit of our workflow here and how from when you request your inspection until you receive it. So number one, the realtor submits the request through our portal. Number two, the inspector receives the inspection on the field on their tablet. Then the inspector completes the inspection on a first come, first serve. And after that, they sync their tablet, and the inspection gets uploaded to our portal, which automatically triggers an automatic email, right? So we think that we do not require more communication than this to attend your inspection request, and that helps us stay, on track and be fast. You can always ask us any questions, and this is my email down here. But if you would like to have my personal cell phone, please request that to my email, to p7@tahoedonor.com, and I'll be happy to share it so that we can call each other or text. So the first things first, how to request the inspection. If you don't have this saved on your browser yet, the fastest way to access the request form is to type on Google Tahoe Donor Defensible Space. Click on that inspection program section right under Defensible Space. And here on the right, you see that the page that opens up has a box called Request a Defensible Space Inspection. And once you click it, you will find the form to fill up. Thank you. So yeah, ensure that the email is well spelled on the request, and that's because we need to add that email into the property so that those automatic emails get sent. So it's very important that you spell that correctly. Write any important notes or comments here on the form as well, just like you would with an email, and stay alert for that automatic email, which looks like this. The email here on the left, and then once you click on it and you open it, you will see that there is a link to the report and an access code. Turnaround time, we're thinking 3 days to 1 week. We're always aiming for earlier, but at least give us a week before you call us asking if we have done it. Again, my email is down there, and please request my phone number if you want. Some classic questions that we get, I'm not sure if my request was received. I don't remember if I sent the request, and for that, a lot of people tend to send a new request, and that means that we get a new inspection on the field, and someone goes out there. So if that's the case, if you don't remember something, again, send us an email or request my cell phone and text me, and I'll try to answer as soon as possible.
Well, I'll actually jump in with great news, which is that we have a software update from the provider that's going to send a confirmation email confirming that they submitted a request, and it will include in the body, at least, we're trying to get it in the subject line, the address for which the inspection was requested. So first thing that you should do is search your emails to see if you got that confirmation to know whether you submitted a request or not.
Okay, perfect, awesome. So yeah, so look for that email, as Maria said, and obviously you can always contact us if you have any other questions. And here I put this realtor's best practice to achieve compliance at Tahoe Donor, and this is more aimed to your contractors, which I also shared with them with a little bit different language. But like ensure that the contractor that you work with, completes these steps. And the first one is that they have access to the report, that they access it, that they understand Tahoe Donor rules, that they read carefully our parameters, as they might differ a little bit from the rest of the district. And remind them that pictures are only examples, and that if an item is on the report, it needs to be brought to compliance throughout the whole property. Then the best contractors, the first thing that they do is find the property corners, and we do mark those corners with pink flagging, and we do our best to maintain them throughout the year. We have 6,500 properties, and every year we re-flag around 1,000 of those corners. 2,000 of those corners on the back of the property. And it's important because once you find that corner, you can shoot a line with bearings and understand how big the property is. The best of the best contractors, they flag the line down to ensure that they complete work until that point. Because if they do not, unfortunately, we're going to have to fail the inspection, and they will have to come back So yeah, super important. And after completing the work, it's good that the contractor uses the inspection to walk the property, just like if they were the inspector, and ensuring that everything is completed. If they follow these steps, I can assure you that 99% of them will receive a compliancy on their re-inspection, and no more re-inspections will be needed. And I could get into a lot of detail with our rules, and everything will be very well specified on the report. But I wanted to talk to you about one in particular, and that's Zone 0, and that's because it differs a little bit with Truckee Fire. Truckee Fire Zone 0 says 5 feet from structure. Well, Tahoe Donner says 10 feet from structure. And what Zone 0 says is no vegetation, no flammable material whatsoever within those 10 feet. So for pine needles, pine cones, wood debris, any sort of debris, that needs to be brought down to bare dirt or rock. And another thing that's very important, as you see in the pictures below, is alive vegetation, plants. And we're not allowing any sort of alive plants within those 10 feet, even if they're well-maintained or landscaped. We understand that this might be an issue with some homeowners, some sellers, or even the buyers. And please refer them to us if they have any questions, and we will be able to explain them all of this better and get into the science of it if necessary. And that also goes for combustible materials, right? That's a classic one under the decks. Again, Zone 0, no flammable materials within that zone. So unless it's steel, it can burn. So please make sure that your contractor or whoever property manager is in charge, that they removed those objects that are also flammable. And now let's talk about trees tagged for removal. You know that we tag trees with orange ribbon, and that's mainly for canopy spacing and ladder fuels. For trees that are very small, like the ones on the right picture, there is so many of them that we cannot tag all of them, but we do take a picture of them so that you have an example of what that looks like. We X them out, to refer that they have to be removed. So please take a look, ensure that your contractor takes a look at that and understands that. And please do not remove flagging from trees. Last year we had a realtor that I think they were removing the flagging because they wanted to show the house, and they decided that the flagging didn't look appealing. And that creates some problem, right? Because their contractor had to be back a couple times, and because they missed a lot of trees. So please do not do that. And a quick reminder that it is not allowed within our rules. And the property owner could get in trouble if we were to report this to our covenants committee. And that's basically it. Request a re-inspection when done using the same system that I explained earlier. If you have any question, please contact us at defensiblespace@tahoedonner.com. If you want my personal cell, request that at psalmon@tahoedonner.com. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paul. That was a ton of great information. Brittany, do we have questions specific for Paul and the Tahoe Donner details?
We currently have no questions.
Okay. Well, in that
case, excuse me, just something important. That one of those differences that I added to the chat is that at Tahoe Donner, properties with 4 or fewer units will be inspected across the full extent of the lot boundary. And unit owners are responsible for working with their HOA to ensure compliance with defensible space regulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
It's my understanding that Tahoe Donner's approach is like one level above Truckee Fire's already aggressive approach in terms of things like community areas, within a fourplex or a duplex or an apartment complex, and as well as the zero space zone being farther out, than even the aggressive new zero space, which it turns out, as I found out through my talks with CAL FIRE, is very important. Maria, can I ask you, or can I kind of bring one thing to your attention as a question?
Please.
In the past, I know that, announced, unannounced, announced is much more problematic just because of the time frames, and you never know how long you're going to spend on site one place to another. And I appreciate the drop down with the free flow narrative that allows you to mention things like I have a locked gate and whatever. But I wanted to make note for our community that represents buyers and sellers, that we also have to think about the liability of having someone with boots on the ground on private property doing an inspection. So let's say you have a backyard and it is fenced, it is locked, and it's locked because you have a security dog. Well, if it's unannounced, even if you unlock the gate, the inspector's not going to be very happy, and probably neither will the homeowner be after the dog gets done with the inspector. Or if you're someone who happens to be a firearms owner and wasn't expecting someone to be prowling around your backyard, the inspector might not be very happy to be looking down the wrong side of, a weapon. And so there are a number of reasons that I can think of that to protect the liability exposure, it would be of value to either make sure that all of those potential liabilities are removed before the possibility of that 2-week window, or that you specifically note those in the free-form narrative, so that then you will get notification and you can secure your dog, secure your whatever, and so that we reduce that liability exposure.
That's correct. And that's exactly what I was going to say. We will 100% respect if you put in the notes that you want us to contact someone before we access the property. And we're going to have to play it by ear a little bit. I think the most likely thing that we'll be able to do is either schedule a specific date and time with you, or if it's just a matter of the person is always home, but the dog is loose in the yard, texting them before the inspector arrives, that's also something that we can very easily accommodate. So I think those are probably the most likely options. To be honest, I think I've only had one situation where, letting me know that he didn't want me to come in the backyard. And I know who requested the inspection, so I called the transaction coordinator and, made a time for me to circle back when the owner was home on lunch. So our inspectors are interested in protecting their own safety as well. And if we, for any reason, don't feel that it's appropriate for us to access a property, we won't. We'll circle back to you guys and, set a time and date for that to happen. So thank you for pointing that out, John, for considering everybody's safety there. Brittany, do we have other questions that have come up?
We currently have no additional questions in the Q&A or the chat. If anyone does have questions and you want to voice them yourself, feel free to raise your hand on that top action bar, and we can call on you and you can unmute your mic. Otherwise, feel free to add questions into the chat or Q&A.
Thanks so much, Brittany. So barring that, I'm going to circle back to one question that was asked was about benefits from home hardening, and then questions about insurance. We'll make this info available, but the short answer is that there is overlap between the home hardening items that are going to be added to the FHDS form from that low-cost retrofit guide. There's overlap between those and the priorities that the state has identified that now must be considered for a homeowner's wildfire property insurance. That's a really big topic, and I'm happy to speak to it. Our goal is to expand, update our website that currently touches on homeowners insurance questions. The other thing that a lot of people are looking at for insurance discounts right now is being in a Firewise community, which 85% of our residential structures are. So chances are good that the properties you are putting on the market are already in a community. We have an excellent website that we've developed for that, with a lot of answers to questions about Firewise communities that I'm guessing Brittany is already going to pop into the chat. And then the other thing to bring to your attention is that the other discount available that is a community level mitigation is being on a fire risk reduction community list, which the fire district is, the town of Truckee is, and both Nevada and Placer counties are on the list. So I don't think you get to double dip on that discount, but you can also find information about that on that homeowners insurance question website. If we still don't have any questions, then I'm going to circle back to one of the things that I wanted to talk to you guys about, which is some tips for working with your defensible space providers. We strongly recommend that you give them online access to the report. And one of the reasons for that is because the printed PDF report is limited to 2 photos per finding. Online access is required to view all of the photos. We also encourage you to let us know who's doing the work. We have been, the contractors have been doing this work, many of them for a very long time. And we have been working with them and know their work and, their integrity. So oftentimes, if you let us know who is working on the property, we can communicate with them directly about outstanding mitigations to save you this sort of roundabout going back and forth. If there's a reinspection, there's one outstanding thing, you don't need to get an updated report, send it to the contractor. The contractor calls me to figure out what's going on. The owner thinks that something is amiss. Just put us in touch directly with the contractor, and we'll do our best to work directly with them to sort of expedite the process. A lot of them are now submitting resolution photos or submitting the request for reinspection. You might ask them if that's something that they're offering now. You might also consider requesting a compliance guarantee. We just had many of you filled out a survey, and we also had a survey that our defensible space contractors filled out. And I'm going to show you some interesting findings from that that speak to that compliance guarantee. The last thing that I'll point to is that there are a couple of items on the defensible space requirements that are non-vegetation specific. This is stuff like stored combustibles, building supplies, updating address numbers. Some of the contractors take care of these issues for you. Some of them don't. It's important that you clarify that with the contractor so that when the reinspection time comes around, everybody knows who is responsible for taking care of which thing, and no one's surprised that they didn't get a compliant report when they covered everything that they think was within their purview. Tahoe Donner, I'm going to say, is excluded from what the next part I'm about to share. Tahoe Donner tags their trees, so they have a different process for their inspection than Truckee Fire does. Truckee Fire does not tag trees. We don't tag trees. So one of the questions we asked you guys in the survey was if you try to get the defensible space work completed before requesting a defensible space inspection, and if not, why? And it was interesting to see the range of your guys' answers, and some of them are, 100% understand. For some of you guys, in some situations, the owner needs to see the report to understand that this is actually being required by the fire district. Fair. What I would point out is that about half of the respondents said that the contractor needs to have the report to know what work to do. I beg to differ, and I'll tell you why. One is because defensible space is not rocket science. It's a basis of principles about creating separation between combustible items. There are a lot of different ways to achieve the same effect. So our report is not the only way to do something. And a lot of times you guys are working with contractors that are at the top of their field because they have so much experience in this work that they achieve the goal and it still looks nice, which is why they do what they do. And we just tell you what the hazards are. So what I would say is Rebecca Ellis gave me a great quote that they found looping us in early and giving the contractors direct access has saved them a ton of time. They work with vendors who guarantee a compliant inspection, and it streamlines the whole process and avoids delays. the truth is that a lot of the contractors know, they understand the laws of defensible space. They have worked with us and have a direct line of communication with us to understand what is required. And they know what we're looking for on our reports. And they are putting their money where their mouth is. A lot of them, 90% of the respondents, and this is the majority of who's on the contractor list this year, they say that they offer a guarantee that their work will result in a compliant inspection. This means what they're saying is that if they missed something, they're not going to charge you to come back and fix it, right? And often, if there is something mixed, if these are the guys that we're in touch with them directly, we'll give them a call. They send their guy back out there, snip, snip, and then you guys get a compliant inspection, and that's the next thing that you know of it. It's in their best interest, right? If they're guaranteeing their work, they need to know what we're doing in order to, what we're looking for in order to not have to come back out. So working with a service provider that guarantees their work, in theory, is going to improve the process for all of us, because it encourages them to be really familiar with what we're looking for and to get it right the first time, so that when we come out, the whole process takes less time. Everything looks, appropriate. It has the separation it needs. We spend less time on site and can just confirm that the property is compliant. So this is something that we would really encourage you guys to consider if your sellers are amenable to it. I'm going to pop back out and zoom in on another detail, unless we have any questions, Brittany.
We just got a question about sharing the contractors list. And yes, once that is published for this year, that will be available on our Defensible Space page, which I will share in the chat right now.
Thank you. We have a super easy link now that I can't find. There we go. truckeefire.org/contractors. We'll take you to the current list, and when we update the list with those that have attended this year's webinar, it'll be available at the same site. The next topic that I wanted to point out to you guys is about accessing the report. From the survey, I was surprised that more than half of you didn't know that there's an option to log in to the report website. So I wanted to show you where it is. And of those that did know that that was possible, most of you said that it's useful, which makes me very happy. So many of you are familiar with this site, defensiblespacereport.org/Truckee. The login button in the top right corner, when you click on that, it'll have you do, the same as it looks anywhere, that single sign-on situation. And once you create a login, you only have to enter the address and the code once for each property, and it adds it to your list of properties. So that should simplify things a lot, and maybe you'll hate this website 3% less than you currently do. I know the report can be frustrating. And on that note, if we don't have other questions, then I'm going to jump to a couple of other hot tips for the report. We mentioned we strongly recommend always accessing the online report because it shows all of the photos. And this is a good sort of case study. The printed report for this particular inspection only had the 2 pictures that you can see here. And I know homeowners have a panic reaction when they see managed vegetation and then they see pictures of their most prized trees, we are usually telling you that manage rather than remove. We're usually trying to give some indication in our photos of what we're looking for. This photo from that particular report wasn't visible on the PDF, but it was visible online, where we have markup saying that this needs to be pruned away from the building rather than removed completely. So we always recommend that. Another quick tip when you're navigating the report is to look at the inspector notes. This is something we've asked our software provider to make pop a little bit more so that you guys know where to find it. But the inspector is often putting specific details, especially for those zone 0 things where there are a lot of different direction that we could be giving. We may be putting notes in the inspector notes section, and this is visible on both the PDF and the online report. It's more prominent in the online report. One more thing that I wanted to point out is in the online report, you can see in the very tippy toppy corner of the photos, you can see that there is a date stamp. Another thing that we would like to get more prominently displayed, but my point in showing this is to explain that our report is a live report, so to speak. So each time we go to the property, we are not starting completely fresh with a blank slate. We are updating, we're basically responding to what is existing on the report. Sometimes there's something existing on the report and it's been partially but not completely mitigated. We might add a photo of what has partially been done. Let's see, the tree has been pruned a little bit, but not as much as we want. We'll put a new photo to show you that we're acknowledging the updated state, but this is what still needs to be done. We understand that this can get confusing. We don't have another way to do this at this point. The alternative is resolving the existing thing and putting a new item. Then it looks like we've added something to the report that is actually just a continuation of what was already there. So this is one of those things that I just want to bring to your guys' attention so that you have an idea of sort of what to look for. We recognize that there are some, you know, not ideal things about the report and the navigation of it. We do our best to explain it to homeowners. We're familiar with the challenges in navigating it. But we want to give you guys some of the tools as well. One last thing that I wanted to mention is about photo resolution. Again, on our survey, we asked if you submit photo resolution for defensible space compliance resolution, and if not, why? Some of you are actually already working with contractors that submit it for you. Fantastic. So that's a good indicator that if you are not working with a contractor that does that for you, you might ask them if that's something they would offer to do. And then a number of you had other answers that are things that we both want to speak to and also sort of work with. It can be very time consuming if there are a lot of items on the report. Generally, if there are a lot of items on the report, then it's not actually eligible for photo resolution. We wouldn't encourage you to submit photos for those reports anyway. It's time consuming for you to take them and try and line up the pictures from the same angle as the report photo, and it's time consuming for us to review it. What we will do is in situations where there are a couple of items, they're easily, captured in photos, and we're confident that you'll be able to take a photo that captures the completion of the mitigation. Then we'll indicate in the evaluation note, which is again on this first page of the report, underneath the big cover photo, we'll say that the inspection is eligible for photo resolution. I'm not going to go into detail, but we are hoping to get up on our website a basically how-to video that walks through the steps of submitting the photo resolution. I think once you get it down, it's not unbearable. And if it saves you a week of waiting for us to come out for a reinspection, then we encourage you to do it. One thing to keep in mind with the photo resolution is that it will not update the date of last inspection on your report. So this date will stay the same as the day that we were actually on site on the property. That being said, if you guys need us to confirm, for example, send us an email and say, just explain the situation to dspace@truckeefire.org. We'll be happy to confirm that the resolution photos were verified on a specific date. It's up to you and your understanding of your disclosure requirements, if that is sufficient to meet that requirement of being within 6 months. But just wanted to be clear about that limitation. Brittany, any questions?
No current questions.
Okay, either you guys are all just half listening, or I've been so thorough in answering everything that you might have wanted to know.
You have been so thorough.
I really want to thank all of you for participating today. We appreciate you being proactive and understanding, what the steps are here and working with us to make sure that we can all navigate this process together to make it as efficient as possible. And we all live here. We have the same goal of actually making our community more fire safe. And you guys are an important part of that. Thank you also to our presenters. I really appreciate that we're able to pull so many agencies together to put together a presentation like this. I had a next steps. Next steps. Our calendar will open for real estate inspection requests on Monday at 9 a.m. on that truckeefire.org/real estate website. This webinar recording and everybody's slides will be compiled, as well as a list of all of the websites that were referenced today, so that you guys have those all in one place. And I'll send an email to all of the attendees and registrants that lets you know where to find those things. That'll probably go out early next week. We'll also include contact information for the presenters, and we encourage you guys to reach out to us with any questions. So thank you so much for participating, and we'll see you guys in the field.